Will Republicans take over the United States Senate in this year's elections, or will Democrats hold them off and retain their majority, for whatever that's worth? Who gets to decide the control of the U.S. Senate this year? Well, you do. You, the voter, get to decide. But to the extent that money helps sway things one way or the other, too, you should know that on the Democratic side, it's the Democratic Senate Campaign Committee, the DSCC, the actual Senate Campaign Committee of the Democratic Party, that's doing most of the Senate spending. It's about 96%. 96% of that spending, according to OpenSecrets.org, comes from public donors. Okay, so that's the major Senate spender on the Democratic side. It's the DSCC. 96% of their donors are public. We can, or at least can find out who those donors are. And there is a Republican counterpart to this, led, of course, by Michael Steele and his Fire Nancy Pelosi school bus thing. But on the Republican side, it is not so much the Republican Party doing the funding as it is the private plane crowd. They're funding groups like Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie's American Crossroads. As Ken Vogel reported today in Politico.com, Mr. Rove and Mr. Gillespie's groups announced a huge new ad buy, $4.2 million, all of which American Crossroads tells us will be translated into new TV ads in Senate races in 8 states by Sunday. That'll make it $18 million that American Crossroads and its counterpart, Crossroads GPS, will have spent thus far to help get Republicans elected to the Senate this year. $18 million. $18 million trying to get Republicans elected to the Senate. Where'd that $18 million come from? Who's trying to buy that much influence in the Senate this year? To explain, we will use pie. Not the delicious kind that if you were on a diet you just stare at rather than consume, but rather the delicious kind that you consume simply by staring at it. This pie chart here, we got it? Yes, represents every bit of American Crossroads' new ad buy. About 75% of all that money, the green part you see there, came through Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie's second fundraising arms, the GPS group, Crossroads Grassroots Policy Strategies, Crossroads GPS. That's where 75% of the funding came from for this new ad buy. GPS is an ironic moniker because we will never know the global positioning of the people who gave the money. Donors who send their money to Karl Rove and Ed Gillespie through this GPS, through that 75% there, those donors remain anonymous. Anonymous donors, okay? So the DSCC, on the Democratic side, 96% public. Crossroads GPS, who's giving Republican candidates a big advantage in ad buys, 75% private. Don't worry, though we may never know. They promise none of those donors is foreign. They're secret. We won't know about them anytime before the election. But Karl Rove's group promises us comforting, yay, shout out democracy. Even more interesting is what and who we do know about. The other 25% of the money that they are using for this big new ad buy is from the regular American Crossroads, not the GPS part. We know who those donors are. They disclose those donors. And actually, this 25%, because we know who these donors are, I'd love to talk about this in more detail. They deserve a closer look. It's sort of small in the RP up here. Could somebody help me blow this pie up? Can we just explode that little part of the pie there? Oh, hello! It's billionaire impersonator Kent Jones. Hi, Kent.
Why, hello.
Hello, thank you.
I have here part of the pie.
Thank you very much. You have exploded the pie.
Indeed.
Thank you very much, Kent. All right. In Mr. Moneybags Kent Jones's hands here, what you see is the remaining 25%. Right, of this funding. And almost all of that, the part that is in gold, that huge chunk comes from 3 guys. 3 people. As we've talked about previously, Justin Elliott of Salon.com reported that these 3 guys make up 91% of that group's funding. They're Trevor Reese-Jones, Robert Rowling, and Carl Linder, represented here by living dollar signs. 91% of American Crossroads donations in August. So 75% of this big new ad buy, we're never going to know who donated it. And most of the rest of it comes from 3 guys. Ta-da! That's your Senate this year. The grassroots anti-incumbent tidal wave as financed by, well, 75% by people you'll never know the names of and 25% by mostly 3 guys. Democracy. Joining us now to discuss the cowardly new world of American campaign finance is Peter Stone from the Center for Public Integrity, a nonprofit organization specializing in investigative journalism. Appreciate your time, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much. It's a pleasure.
Can you put this new American Crossroads / GPS ad buy into some sort of historical perspective? How big a deal is this?
Well, what we're seeing this year on the Republican side is really could be quite unprecedented. I mean, they've already raised tens of millions of dollars. American Crossroads and its ally GPS have raised $32 million thus far, and they seem on track to reach their goal of $52 million. The Chamber of Commerce, as you mentioned before, is trying to raise $75 million. They've spent about $20 million thus far. They've really stepped in, as you indicated before, to avoid. They have taken over much of the function that used to be done by the Republican National Committee. And they moved in, they started thinking about this seriously late last year when the Republican National Committee was beset with one problem after another: management problems, fundraising problems, image problems, expense problems. And Gillespie and Rove started meeting with others, and they really had a game plan for putting together American Crossroads, which they were the top outside advisors to, informal advisors, how they started raising money for it. And the Supreme Court decision came along in January and was a godsend, was a blessing, basically, because it allowed these groups to accept unlimited contributions from corporations and individuals, something that they could not do before, and spend them directly on ads advocating for and against individual candidates.
When we look at the disclosure rules now, some of them seem not just loose, not just like they've changed and become more laissez-faire. They seem strange. For example, trying to figure out who the donors are, this vast majority of anonymous donors to this big Republican ad buy for the Senate right now. The news on this is essentially that those donors might be disclosed next year, that the money's going to be spent in this year, for this election cycle, and that we may eventually find out who those donors are. There may eventually be a required to disclose who they are, but it could happen as late as November 2011. Why does that even make sense?
Well, right now, under the IRS rules, they never have to disclose their donors. They do have to file reports on their spending and other activities sometime next year. But the IRS now grants groups like GPS, a 501c4 it's called, and the Chamber of Commerce, they grant them total freedom to not disclose their donors. And most of the new groups that have been set up this year have been set up purposefully as 501c4s to protect the identity of large donors who are nervous about the climate this year. They're nervous because the Supreme Court decision just came down several months ago. They're nervous because 80% of the populace originally said in polls they opposed the decision. Even a large number of Republicans were critical of the decision initially. So many corporate donors have decided safer to go with groups that, you know, will protect our identity, safer to go with groups that are under the radar, basically.
And we all have to pay the price. It's amazing. Peter Stone of the Center for Public Integrity, thank you very much for joining us and helping us sort this out. Have a good night. Thanks.
Thanks.